Okay. Okay, good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting of the Paso Basin Cooperative Committee to order and ask you to all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Blakesley, will you please take the roll?
Yes, thank you. Committee Member Berkeley.
Here.
Thank you, Committee Member Hammond, Baker. Committee Member Hammond.
Here.
Thank you, Committee Member Gibson.
Here.
Thank you, Committee Member Merrill. Here. Thank you, and Chair Turntime.
Here.
And there is a quorum.
Will you briefly describe the meeting protocols, Mr. Blakesley?
Yes, thank you. So there will be for folks attending, we'll have a presentation that staff will present as part of the agenda item. Following that presentation, there will be public comment, and public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per person. And we ask that anyone in the room that would like to make a public comment to come up to the podium. We'll time you. When you have roughly 30 seconds, the light will turn yellow, so you'll know that your time is almost up. And then when the 3 minutes are up, there will be a beep sound, so you'll know that. We are being strict to that 3 minute per person rule. We have a lot of, there's a couple items on the agenda that'll take a while. And so to be efficient with our time, we're going to hold to that 3 minutes per person. If you'd like to make a comment and you're participating via Zoom, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature, and we'll go to you after we take comments in the room. Again, following the public comment, there will be a discussion among the members for each agenda item. And there's not a new GSA staff report. Apologize, that should not have been on the slide there. The last thing I would ask is that you avoid discussions in the Zoom chat, and we ask that if you have something to add, make your comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, and remain muted on Zoom to prevent background noise. And for folks in the room, just remind you to mute your cell phones. And that's all I have to report.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on right away then to item 6A, a report from WSC.
Public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Public comment for items not on the agenda. Mr. Graywall.
Thank you, Board. My name is Greg Graywall. Live in the Creston area. This is the MOA. This is the water code. You are in violation of both of these. MOA 4.9, no power or authority from this board. So how did you approve spending almost $300,000 on a feasibility study that's already been studied 5 times from 2008 to 2020 on dropping state water in the Creston area, when it never went to any of the individual GSA boards and voted on before it was brought back here?
That's on top, yeah.
Yeah, you gotta get off. Okay.
Yeah.
If that happened, I'd like the meeting agenda to be produced and the minutes to be produced on when that happened, because I know that didn't happen. Because we can look up your minutes in your meetings. So no individual GSA voted on doing something. How do you approve an RFP when you're not a contracting agent? So if you send an RFP out in April, you get it back in May, county council signs it in June, and then on July 9th, you're considered a contracting agent. Isn't that kind of backwards? Shouldn't you be the contracting agent first? And shouldn't all the individual boards vote on what you're sending an RFP out, not this group that has no power authority according to the MOA? We got a real problem here with following the rules. We stand up here in front of the flag, we say the flag salute, we go through all these different things, how we're all good citizens and stuff, and then we don't follow the laws. It's real simple. You want to spend $300,000 on a study that's been done 5 times? Spend $300,000. It's not your money, it's taxpayers' money. Because everybody says, oh, it's just grant money, spend it. How about $300,000 on a stormwater capture project that the governor has an executive order that you can do and self-certify? How about we do that? That hasn't been done 5 times. In fact, since 2005 in the prior agreement, not one project has been done. No more monitoring, no more of anything, no stormwater capture, no any kind of project at all other than a study. We got a merry-go-round with all the consultants on it, and they take turns every few years. We get the same consultant again to do another study. Is there like some kind of consultant kickback? I'm really curious because I don't know why we need a study from 2008 that covers some, 2014, 15, 16 that covers some, 2018 covers some, and 2020 that covers something. And if you want to know anything about the state water and where to put it and what to do, it's all in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on items not on the agenda? Mr. Powell.
Murray Powell, Temple Bend resident, TAG vice chair, not representing TAG today. So a few things. First off, I saw and I received actually a mailer and a letter that apparently is a first attempt at some sort of outreach by this committee, finally. Of course, the mailer doesn't really say much. I forgot to bring it, but I'm sure you're all familiar with it, or I hope you're all familiar with it. It looks like it came from SLO County, not from the PBC. But anyway, there's a map in there, highlights 4 or 5 different locations, but doesn't indicate why those locations are indicated. I mean, some of us know why, because those are all the areas that have the worst failures of domestic wells. But there's no mention of domestic wells or failure. And there's also a backup letter that on the back page talks about all the efforts that are being made to move this whole situation along. And it's news to me because I haven't hardly seen anything move along in the last 1.5 to 2 years that I've been involved. So, but anyway, hopefully you'll keep up the good work. Also, I just want to advise all of you, and you probably know it, that the Board of Supervisors had 3 different meetings on June 18th, July 9th, and July 16th, where they tried to slip through several different PBCC GSA items as regular Board of Supervisor consent items. So my understanding is for the county, who's one of you GSAs, to do anything related to this has to convene separate GSA meetings, and they don't do it. As far as concerns go, during one of those hearings, Mr. Gibson and his gang over there decided that they were going to amend the PBC approved budget that came up a couple of meetings ago. And if you look at it says PBC recommended budget with boss recommended revisions. So what you have now, your MOA says you cannot have any expenditures unless you have 100% approved annual budgets. And they tried to ram through an approval on a budget that Mr. Gibson modified. You guys probably haven't even seen it. Well, actually, it's on page 77 and 78 of your packet. So when we get to that,
Okay.
I'll be happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any other public comment on items not on the agenda? Any online, Mr. Blakesley?
None online, Chair.
Okay. With that, we'll close public comment on items not on the agenda and move on to item 6A, an update on the grant funded project starting with WSC. And then, as Mr. Blakesley described, we'll hear the report, take public comment, bring it back to the committee for discussion.
And I'll provide just a brief background before Michael starts. So as a reminder for this body and the audience, in 2020, Paso Basin was awarded a $7.6 million grant from the California Department of Water Resources to implement the GSP.
I just want to clarify, because this comes up periodically. The grant was actually awarded to the county of San Luis Obispo to do work towards the implementation of the approved groundwater sustainability plan. So just for clarification.
Thanks, Blaine. The grant spending plan, again, that's been distributed, is composed of 6 components. And component 6 is for supplemental water supply feasibility and engineering studies. Task 1 of component 6 identifies the blended water supply feasibility study project. An RFP was issued for this project back in July of last year, and Water Systems Consulting, WSC, was the selected consultant. And WSC provided a presentation on the demand and supply characterization at our May 22nd PBCC meeting a month and a half ago. And an update on the draft alternatives analysis is being provided today, which Michael and his team will provide. And just a reminder, and I think Michael will get into this, but just a reminder on this project overall is looking at developing a supplemental water supply for the basin. So it's looking at a new supply to meet current ag demand and hopefully to reduce the overdraft in the basin. That's the kind of overall goal of this project. So I'll turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Taylor. Welcome, committee members, ladies and gentlemen of the public. As Taylor said, my name is Michael Gwemrack. I'm with Water Systems Consulting. I'm the deputy project manager. I'm joined here by Rob, who's also from WSC, who's the project manager for this work, this effort. So purpose of today, as Taylor mentioned, is to provide an update on the project and in particular give details of our alternatives analysis, which has been ongoing over the last few months since the last update. So today we'll do a quick review of the project drivers and supply demand. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that, and then we'll dive into the core of the today's update, which is items 3 and 4, the alternatives, and then common alternatives, and then look forward to next steps and future presentations in this venue. So as a reminder, the project drivers, 1, to inform GSA rate setting. And then, which is an ongoing project that's also get presented today, and then the project feasibility and conceptual design, and provide project alternatives and costs for acquisition of funding and other things. So let's get into a quick refresher on supply and demand from last presentation. As you recall, we have 3 supply scenarios. Scenario 1, which is the firm supply availability, or we're calling it firm supply availability. This was when we surveyed the various participants, or at least the participants in the Nacimiento Water Project that have the largest supplies, they voiced some availability that they could make, and those put together is roughly 320 acre feet per month from Nacimiento, and then we're obviously adding on the 170 acre feet a month from the city's recycled water. Scenario 2, that's basically the individual peak months of high volume participants, irregardless of time. Again, adding the recycled water component to that. And then the historical summer average unused supply is scenario 3, 850 acre feet a month, plus the city's recycled water. You know, we looked at a range of scenarios here. These are the 3 that we brought forward. There were some higher and both lower. I will bring a number later on in the presentation that is a number slightly higher than these, closer to about 1,400 acre feet a month. That represents annual average, approximate annual average. Not a scenario that we're necessarily reviewing or discussing or have brought forth, but something to provide some context to some future graphs. So, you know, when we're looking at supplies and demands for each of these different areas and things like that, we're overlaying obviously those 2 supplies I mentioned on the previous ones, so the recycled water and then Nacimiento Water Project, looking at that on a water year basis. This doesn't have any numbers to it, but just to give you a sense of For each one of those supply scenarios, when we're matching various demands based on these alternatives, we're then looking at where are the months where there may be groundwater gaps, or how can we fill those gaps with maybe additional storage or different pipeline sizes and things like that. So pump stations and the like, so all the different infrastructure components. So let's jump into alternatives analysis. We spent we could spend a good amount, a couple hours here reviewing all the different alternatives, and all that will be captured in our eventual summary report. But just to give an overview of the different kind of alternatives that were varying, or different inputs that were varying for each alternative. We're looking at service size alternatives. That's kind of the main one. We're kind of calling our core alternative. So we split this into 5 service areas. We reviewed some of those service areas with you the last time. And then we're doing various combinations of those services, which vary demands and service areas. So anywhere from 13 to over 4,000 acres of irrigated land. And then with that obviously comes a variety of different number of turnouts for each customer, demands, pipeline sizes, pumping capacities, all vary depending on the size and the demand. Next, we're looking at kind of what we call kind of supply constraint alternatives. So simulating, building smaller versus larger systems. We have a couple different groups here. One where we took just the main service area 1A, and we varied the different 3 supply scenarios that I presented on previously. And then we looked at a second larger group where we looked at the largest supply scenario and varied different combinations of service areas. So building off of that kind of core service area into other areas, and what could we potentially serve if we had supplies up in that higher range, or up in those ranges on the larger supply scenarios. And then we're looking at different kind of operational alternatives too, right? So limited on-demand systems, scheduled systems versus maybe a continuous delivery system where we're pushing out storage out onto the users, maybe varying pipeline sizes and the volume of storage, both on the user side. So obviously if you have more storage in the system, you can get away with a little bit smaller pipelines. How does that impact costs? We're looking at all those kinds of components to it. Different turnout styles, delivery pressures, how it impacts from the users. Let's say they close a valve, what does that do to the system? There's different turnouts that we can do to help protect that system from potential user error and things like that. And then there's common alternatives that are associated, no matter what size service area or how we're going to operate the system, or what different supplies come into it. Then we have things like treatment and blending, which are going to be necessary for every alternative. A pipeline alignment, obviously getting the water out to it, very slightly depending on where we're serving, but for the most part, that core alignment through the service area 1A is largely the same. And looking for that most efficient path and lowest cost, and other impacts, environmental impacts, easements versus right-of-ways, that kind of thing. And then hydraulics analysis, looking to reduce energy costs, pumping sizes, and that kind of thing. So here's a view, kind of an overview of all the different service areas we looked at. So on the lower left, you can see the different infrastructure components needed to bring those 2 supplies. We have the city's recycled water system, which is in the process of being designed and bid and built out. And then the turnout to the Nacimiento water line, and they're in blue, and coming to a blending facility and a pump station, and then sending that out to, again, those different service areas. And that's where we're playing with different sizes of this, different demands, different properties that we're serving. That main service area is shown there in purple. We're calling 1A. 1B would be some additional properties within that we could add on with some, again, additional segments. So that darkest bold black line would be that primary backbone pipeline that would essentially needed regardless of which service areas or which size system we do. And then we're building off of that. Can we serve out there towards East Jardine area and 2A, that blue area, up north across the Estrella, into service areas 3A and 3B, and what do those demands look like as we bring on different properties? And again, all the different components of that, pipelines, storage booster stations, and then customers' facilities such as turnouts or potentially for low pressure systems, they may need their own booster stations on site too. So we are looked at about 8 different alternatives, alternative system sizes, which we've compressed here today into kind of 3 categories. So kind of your small, medium, and large. So our small systems are essentially focused on that 1A, the purple and the green. Medium again gets expanding out into some of these other areas, and then the largest systems includes multiple service areas. And those irrigated acreage, again, varies anywhere between 1,000, depending on the size of the system, up to 4,000 acres, with demands ranging from 2,000 up to almost 8,000 acre feet a year, and monthly demands from about 350 to almost 450 or almost 1,400 acre feet a month. That 4th column there in green, the max month demand, keep those numbers in your mind as we move forward to the next few slides. We'll show you how we're kind of lining up the supplies with these different size systems. But the pipeline sizes, as you can see, and the length of pipe vary depending on these as we, again, build out into these systems. More demand, obviously, is larger pipelines. And so obviously there's a wide variety, a wide range in cost potentially with these, anywhere from a small to large system. But what we're seeing is that a lot of the unit costs, when you break these down into cost per acre foot, that the costs are fairly similar at this stage of our estimating. And I think that's it for this slide. All right, so I'm going to walk you through a couple different of these slides. It's the same slide, but we're varying the supply scenarios. So you'll see that dashed line in the middle go up. So we have the small system, the different size systems on the bottom. So our small system ranging anywhere from 350 to 700 acre feet a month max. Medium system between 700 and 900. And then that larger system, 1,000 to 1,400. And those are just those numbers from that 4th column on the previous slide. And then the supply or demand in acre feet a month, looking at that max summer month primarily. And so the big question here as we kind of get through the next few slides, which we'll show here, is what size system should be constructed, kind of considering the uncertainty in supply and availability. Really anything above scenario 1 is at risk of being impacted by potential future supplies of these individual participants from the Nacimiento supplies, right? In any given year, and looking out into the future, they have this water earmarked for various reasons: growth within their communities, reliability, maybe supply redundancy or diversification of their supplies. And so there's a risk associated with, depending on what size system you want to build here, and obviously there's a cost associated with that risk too. So trying to capture that and those thoughts as we kind of move forward into the next few slides. So and another thing too, we looked at the historical frequency of these supply scenarios. So that 650, or excuse me, the lowest supply scenario, supply 1, which was 490 acre feet total based on that 350 acre feet a month from Nacimiento, occurred about 100% of the time, or exactly 100% of the time in the historical months that we looked at. But again, those could be impacted by future supplies variability. Supply scenario 2 is the same thing. It occurred about 100% of the times in the years and months that we looked at, primarily looking at summer months between 2015 and 2023. In this case, with supply scenario 2, if we build a medium-sized system where we can largely supply most of those demands or demands within that range of systems. But there could be, let's say you build a smaller system, that 350 to 700 acre feet a month demand, and there's certain years where you may have access to those supplies, like under supply scenario 2, you would have underbuilt the system, right? You have more supply than you have demand. You could have irrigated more acreage. So there was a little bit of a lost opportunity there. But it's right-sized for that middle-sized system. Onto the next slide. And as we move up with those supply scenarios, right, we have the demand ranges for those larger type systems anywhere between 1,000 to 1,400. With that supply scenario, a little over 1,000 acre feet a month. In this case, we we've based on our estimation or looking back at historical, frequency of this was about 60% for supply scenario 3. So there may be times where this supplies are less than, if you build a larger system, these supplies are maybe down there in that supply 1 or supply scenario 1 or 2, and you would have overbuilt a system that can't fully supply all the demands within that system. Then we can go to the next slide. And then there's this occasionally available, again, that was that number that we didn't bring that scenario forward, but this is based on essentially average month, historical month. And there could be years, for example, the last 2 years where we've had really wet years where maybe there are these supplies that are available and you're fully meeting most of the demands of a large system. But in any of the other cases, you're not making use of those years. And so again, this goes back to this risk question. What size system should be constructed considering this supply availability and this uncertainty with this? Obviously, there's a much larger commitment with capital costs for these larger systems than there for the smaller, and the debt service repayment on those needs to be repaid regardless of what types of supplies you have and that variability that we have in the future. So we looked at a couple different turnout styles, pressurized style turnouts, which are very common in these systems. They support slightly higher pressure deliveries, much simpler design, off-the-shelf items that can be easily replaced or serviced. Just a simple standpipe that essentially comes out of the ground with a meter and some valving, and then the agricultural pipelines on the right side there, going out to supply. Looking at different styles, such as these float systems, which is essentially a standpipe there in concrete that fills with water from that green pipe. There's a float that's on there that controls a valve. So as the demand on the user side increases, that water level drops and opens that valve more. If their demands drop off, they're irrigating for whatever reason, and that water level rises in that concrete standpipe, then it shuts that valve off. So this is a little bit better for operations and system safety. You don't have issues with people closing valves or causing surge issues in your supply system. So it makes it a little bit more user-friendly, but doesn't support the potential higher pressures because you're disconnecting the hydraulics from the supply system to the individual user's distribution system. And similarly, we could do this style with a pond, obviously, and this would allow for slightly smaller pipelines, maybe lower pressures. Again, pushing that storage out into the users and just giving them kind of a continuous or more continuous supply. Doing the engineering work too, looking at hydraulics of the pipeline, elevations and topography and impacts from that, trying to, again, keep costs both from capital costs and also estimating O&M costs, primarily pumping energy, and looking at different ways that we can split up the system. So what we noticed, especially in this example, when you're looking at the core alignment, that there's a high point that's kind of in the last third or so of the alignment out there off Tower Road or towards the end of the runway of the airport. And so what we can do is have potentially 2 different pump stations, one at the blending facility that pumps to about that midway point at the intersection of Tower and Airport there, where you see that pump in blue. And then we can have a secondary booster pump station that evens out that energy grade line, provides a little bit more efficient system. Even though you have 2 different pump stations, you're able to meet the hydraulic grade line a little bit better rather than pumping directly from the blending facility, in this case, since we have such a large alignment or long alignment. And then water quality and treatment. There's a couple different strategies here. We have different constituents of concern depending on the 2 supplies. So recycled water, these are well-known chlorides, TDS, essentially salts, cations, sodium, calcium, magnesium are concerns for the agricultural users. And then the Nacimiento has its own challenges that are primarily operational. Iron and manganese and turbidity can cause impacts to treatment systems. Iron and manganese can be an issues for on-site users, both their own treatment systems as well as their drip irrigation system. The iron and manganese in particular is in a certain type of species where it will precipitate at the drip, at the point of drip, at the base of the plants, and cause those drip emitters to clog. So we need to deal with that, even though it's not a water quality or essentially a kind of a toxicity impact to the plant. It is an operational, on-site operational concern. So the impacts for the chlorides and salts, obviously long-term impacts from salinity buildup in a high value wine region. And then there's acute toxicity limits certainly at higher levels to the vines. So we need to deal with those in kind of from two different ways. And then, as I mentioned, the impacts from the primarily Nascimento ones are that oxidation and clogging of the drip emitters. And so we have two different strategies for tackling these. Strategy for the recycled water is try to maintain some sort of minimum blend of the Nascimento to dilute those chlorides and TDS. We looked at different treatment technologies for dealing with salts, and primarily you're usually limited to ion exchange or RO or something that ends up driving the costs up into ranges that are likely infeasible for a project like this. And then continue on-farm practices such as gypsum addition or other ways that they're managing sodium absorption ratio, SAR. And then strategies for the Nascimento. This is the primary kind of treatment that we're going to be looking at, which is converting that iron and manganese to the oxidized forms. We'd add an chemical oxidant to that, and then using a green sand filtration for removal of those at that blending facility. And so that we're sending better quality water once it's at that point of blend with the recycled water. Project schedule. So right here in the end of July, we're right in the middle of working on this report. And here we are today on the 24th presenting to you. We'll wrap our report up in early September. And we have another presentation scheduled at the end of September. We'll give you a summary of that report in slide form. And that is it for today. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you very much. Let's open it up for public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the board for discussion, and we may call you back up for some questions, Michael. Thank you. Public comment on this item 6A, Mr. Graywall.
Yes, thank you, Greg Graywall. So I didn't see anything in the report or this study that talks about the 7 years of annual reports, the 436,000 acres of basin with only 40,000 being irrigated ag, the 10,000 acre feet a year for the last 7 years of supplemental water from Nascimento that hasn't been used, the 7 years of 100 acre feet of state water at the turnout in Shannon that hasn't been used, no pond covers over the plus 60 ag ponds to stop evaporation, nothing about stormwater capture. And when we got our basin management plan approved, it was because we were supposed to identify more about the shallow wells and the interconnectivity of the surface to the groundwater. So where is the stormwater capture projects? Why isn't that in there? And you show these pipelines. I go back to the water code. Before certain agencies were allowed to petition to be water districts, they were supposed to have a system of works. So you want to ask the people in the basin to follow the water code, but you didn't follow the water code on an MOA that you said doesn't exist because you made an amendment. Now you made it a second amendment to the same MOA, and none of this stuff matters. And we're talking about projects that have no automatic benefit to the basin. For the rest of the people that live over the basin, this is not a sustainability groundwater management deal. This is a sustainability wine industry deal. I'm sorry, I don't have profit sharing in J. Lore or Justin Wineries or any of these places. These are business decisions these guys made. You want to make a deal with the city to buy their water? That's your deal. You want to make a deal with San Miguel to buy their water? That's their deal. If Paso wants to sell their Nazi water, that's their deal. That's not basin management. That's not capturing the stormwater that lands on the 436,000 acres, which is always over, pretty much over 12 inches. That's 436,000 acre feet a year, and we use 90. That's the low hanging fruit. That's the cheap stuff to do. That's not spending $2,500 to $3,000 an acre foot for state water or Nacimiento water. And I didn't hear any prices on what the acre foot per water is going to be. And so you can get a grant for these private businesses to build a pipeline that benefits them and doesn't benefit the basin. That's unacceptable. That is not what this management thing was supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be doing what's good for the basin and the majority of the people over the basin. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item 6A? Mr. Powell.
I just have a couple, Murray Powell, again. I have a couple of questions. I wonder if they could maybe clarify a couple of things that they showed on the presentation. So if you go to page 8.
Chair, we typically just receive.
Yeah,
comments, and then
if we can take note of your questions, then we'll try to get all the questions answered.
There's acronyms, and I just want to clarify what they are. So they got an NWP, a BW, and an RW. I think I know what they are, but I think they need to be clarified as exactly, and then they show up on the maps. So and then on the maps, either page 12 or 13, they have a solid black line called a backbone. Is that a pipeline? Is that a pipeline that's going to deliver the water? And then there's also a broken line that's an alternate background. I assume I understand it's an alternate design, but is that a pipeline that we're talking about that's running around throughout those maps or what? And then on the turnouts, how many turnouts are there designed for that system? I assume there has to be turnouts at various places along the pipeline somehow to get this water into all these individual parcels. And I think that was it. Yeah, and then so if these pipelines run along a parcel property lines, then in order to get the material or the water into each parcel, is that up to the property owners to design their own water system coming off of those pipelines or not? That is, I believe. Oh, and then on the Nassau water, what's the allocation? What's the water allocation out of Nassau by month or by year? And if it's available all year, or what periods of time is it available?
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any other public comment on this item 6A? Mr. Carter.
Yeah, Steve Carter, San Miguel irrigator. And I would just take exception with the idea that the project couldn't be beneficial to the overall basin. Certainly if we were able to use Nacimiento water and recycled water in lieu of pumping groundwater, especially since we do have areas near the Jardine communities that are, short of water. We've had issues there before. I think it certainly could be beneficial to the basin as a whole. Whether the amount of money being spent could have better benefit, that's a different question. But I think, just the concept of using Nazi water blended with recycled water is certainly beneficial to the basin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Any other public comment on item 6A? Any online comment?
No, Chair.
Okay, seeing no further comment, bring it back to the board. Any discussion or comments, questions? Maybe Michael, you can rejoin us too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, and I'm not sure that it has a significant effect on demand, but in the maps where you show potential service areas, there's a variety of parcels that aren't necessarily contiguous. And I was curious, if, in my memory, are these parcels that have expressed some interest, or are these identified on some other basis as candidates for being included in a potential service area?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. In some cases, there's ones that have been part of the project for many years, since it was called the Buena Vista Project or Buena Vista Recycled Water Project. But and then we also looked at crop types as well. So in some of these gaps where you don't see, a shading over it, color shading, maybe because they're not doing any crop irrigation, or maybe they were labeled as, unused farm or some other kind of label that was not a crop type. So
I was, again, just curious as, if things change as you work through your alternatives analysis here. For instance, down in the lower left corner, I see a green parcel from Service Area 1B that's nearly surrounded by Service Area 1A in the pink. That's just, right there. Why wouldn't that just be part of a single service area? Likewise, the parcel off to the west there.
Again, I think we were trying to capture some expressed interest based on information that was provided to us. I don't remember that specific parcel, for instance. And, we're looking at this at a very early stage. We did some outreach at the vineyard management company level, which serve many of these properties, but not all. I think there's going to need to be future efforts where there'll be some door knocking and more of a kind of verbal commitments and higher level commitments that can be captured in our study and our effort at this stage. So,
and I presume you have demand estimates for each parcel.
Yeah, and that's
attached. That's part of your overall calculation.
That's right. So each one of these turnout numbers, there's a demand associated with that. That's primarily ET or evapotranspiration. And that all gets summed up together as we go along the pipeline. And so, as you can imagine, the pipeline starts large. So we give these pipeline numbers here. That's the largest pipeline at the blending facility. And then it necks down as you go further down the alignment and down these branches and things like that. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
So if I may, while this map's up, and actually the map you just had up, Mr. Blakesley, was probably better. Can you answer some of the questions that we heard during public comment, the acronyms NWP, RW, BW, clarify that these lines, both solid and dashed, are pipelines, and how many turnouts you probably anticipate?
Yes. So I think those questions, acronyms, we have those up on the upper left side. So BW is the blended water. NWP is the Nacimiento Water Project. RW is the recycled water. And I'm trying to look to see if there's any other acronyms we didn't define here. I think that's it. If there were any others, happy to. The solid and dash line. So yes, the solid line they both represent pipelines. It's just that this concept of starting with this core area there in purple and then building out from them provides some flexibility when the decision making is coming to, do we build that small system? Do we expand out into the larger system, or do we reserve that for maybe future build out? So maybe we build a larger pipeline than we need now, but it's still along that same alignment as the solid line. And those dash lines would be additional pipelines that would be needed, either constructed now as part of a larger system or constructed in the future as part of a build out into, let's say, out there past East Jardine or up north across the Estrella. And so in both cases, to reiterate, they're both pipelines. It's just that the dash represents different alternatives off that core alignment or that primary backbone alignment to serve those different service areas. And then the turnouts, it depends on the size. So I think the purple, it's like 25. And at the largest So if we combine that purple with the orange or yellow and the blue up top, I think it was up to 40. So it ranges between 25 and 40 turnouts, depending on the different combinations of service areas that we looked at.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hammond.
Yeah, Chair Turnjan, thank you. Michael, I'm assuming the way I read this anyway is that the pink parcels are the ones that have actually expressed interest in building the project, and then the checkered or the dotted line is probably a second phase who might want to come on later, or is that how you had attempted to?
Well, and this also goes back to, if you recall from the last presentation, we were looked at, what are we looking at? What world are we living in? And we were kind of narrowing that down. And this is obviously that other end of it, where we're kind of looking at this more focused parcel by parcel basis. One of the reasons why when we looked at different placements of a blending facility, the one down here makes the most sense. It's closest to the two facilities, the city's recycled water distribution system and the Nacimiento distribution system. Putting that blending facility anywhere else would require, 2 pipelines going to that spot. Let's say we put it right in the middle. And maybe you need slightly smaller pipelines out on the branches to feed this different system. But, yes, we looked at kind of narrowing this down and trying to get to a system that made sense, or a range of systems that made sense, and where to place these facilities from a cost perspective, a cost feasibility perspective.
Maybe Tyler can zoom in on that lower corner right down there. What I saw when you zoomed in earlier is that black line actually has a purple line underneath of it too. So coming off of the city's recycled water line, that pink line, it actually turns left right there toward the pool. And you can kind of see it if you zoom in a little bit there. But yeah, there's 2 lines, one coming in, one going back out, essentially, the way I read that.
Yeah, and there would be 2 lines there for, I don't know, a couple thousand feet or 1,000 feet or so.
Right. And therefore, I mean, as a whole, the whole system would have a combination of blended water, basically Nasi and recycled.
Yes, that's
going
correct.
into the pool and then repumped through the main black line to the different parcels.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And then I think another question Murray was asking about was total amount from Nasi. I think we have as the Nacimiento Water Project, 17,500 acre feet, less what a little bit I think Heritage Ranch uses.
Yes,
and that's what the partners through the Nacimiento pipeline then allocate between themselves.
The total downstream users is like 15,750 acre feet a year.
That's allocated, right?
And minus those de minimis lakeside users. And so, yeah, and then in our supplier scenarios, I know we're giving those an acre feet a month, and that's primarily because we're focusing on peak irrigation months, July and August. I think they range from, if you go to the next slide, I think we have some different, it essentially lines up with the yields of the systems or demands, which is anywhere between 2,400 to almost 8,000 acre feet a year.
And that hinges on the participants' willingness to sell their water that's, at this point excess, but may not always be consistently the same volumes that they have available.
Yeah, and the Nacimiento Water Sales Program is ongoing right now, and they're working through language and framework for that. We should at least have some concept details of that in the report that we'll have at least that kind of baseline framework that's being discussed. It may change, but we're doing our best to get the most current information in the report. So.
Yeah, I think it's important to note again that the partners in the Nacimiento pipeline, either use it or lose it annually. There's no holdback, from the next year. And I know that Paso's developing language that we would want to definitely push it back into this area to relieve it was definitely a red zone, in the Paso Basin, this whole area that we're speaking of here. So any relief that we can do to put Nasi water back in there, I think it's important. So it's a great project, I thought. So that's all I had, man.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, discussion?
I do. Yeah.
Well,
EPC water, pardon me?
we're at the committee right now, though, Mr. A. We've already taken public comment on it.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Matt.
We've already taken public comment on this.
This is not public comment. This is comment from one of your members.
Okay, well, at the moment,
I assume Dana will yield to me so I can make comments for EPC.
That's up to Mr. Merrill. He wants to speak for you, share some comments for EPC.
Yes, thank you. A couple of comments. One, start out specifically on this. I have some questions about the numbers, because if I look at the total demand and then I look at irrigated acres, the way I read this, we're going to be delivering about 1.7 to 2.1 acre feet of water per irrigated acres. So from my point of view, those numbers don't work out very well. It seems to me that we're talking about far more water than the irrigated acres can consume. So I just would ask that maybe we relook at those numbers, because like I said, if you look at that demand and you look at irrigated acres and go down through all those numbers, it comes out between 1.7 and 2.1 acre feet of water delivered. And the number we all use for in the vineyards is about 1.25. So that strikes me as a considerable amount of more water than we could actually use. And then of course, if you look at 1.25, no system is going to run at 100%. So now you're talking about maybe 1 acre feet that could be used by the irrigated vineyard. So I would encourage take a look at those numbers again. And then I have a couple other questions. I don't expect an answer on this, but I would hope that the report would at least outline the issues of obtaining Nasi water and obtaining recycled water. So this whole project is predicated on having access to water. So I would hope the report would at least kind of outline what are the issues of getting Nasi water, approximately how long would they commit for, and similar things with the city. And I'm not saying I expect a solution on that, but I think I would hope that the report would look into those issues. On the financial side, once the blended water project is up and working, how's the water being paid for? Is there going to be a meter at each property, and that agriculture person pays for that water? Or on the other extreme would be that this would become a basin-wide project, and the basin pays for the operating costs, and the landowners who use that water would be doing the benefit. I think as Steve Carter already talked, they would be benefiting the basin by using that water in lieu of irrigation. So I think that's, I would like to see the report, touch on that kind of issues. And then the last thing is, and I don't recall if there's a financial component to this report, but what are the options for financing this project? There's the capital part up front. I just talked about the operating costs. So I'd like to kind of understand, and I think it would be incumbent on a report like this to at least kind of outline what the financial issues are. So those are some issues I think our group should consider and our contractors should consider. Thank you.
Any other discussion with Mr. Baker?
Just a question. So in San Miguel, we've got our water district and we're supposed to be doing a blended water. But I'm not seeing any pipelines coming out of the San Miguel area. Is that?
Yeah, that would be a separate project.
Okay.
And I know that project's underway, but that would be separate from this blended water supply project.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
I believe that recycled water is going to be directly delivered to properties immediately adjacent to San Miguel.
But that's a separate deal. Okay,
yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you very much. That was a great update. We'll move on to item 6B. Did you want to introduce this item as well, Mr. Blakesley?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, we spoke about the DWR grant that was awarded to the county in 2022. Again, same component 6 of the spending plan One of those projects is being amended to include a rate study project. That RFP was issued in earlier this year, in January of 2024, and SEI Consulting was the selected consultant. And they are providing an overview of the rate study project today, and I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Taylor. Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Ryan Aston, as Taylor stated. I'm with SCI Consulting Group. Glad to be with you today to provide an overview on our general kind of approach to the cost of service study project. So I'll go over some brief introductions, touch on some high-level project goals. I'll introduce you to our team, although they're not all here, but kind of go over the different roles and what people are bringing to the table. And then I'll also touch on the scope of work, particularly the tasks that we've begun already. So my name, as I said, is Ryan Aston. I'm joined today by Nate Page, who you're all familiar with as well. Happy to have him on our team. Dan Heimel had a conflict and could not make it, Dan from Confluence. But these are kind of the core members of the team here. We're really excited to have GSI and Confluence be a part of this as well. In terms of overall project goals, what we're really looking to do here is to provide analysis and support of identifying optimal rate and fee structures that include different revenue generation approaches, cost apportionment options, and fee implementation strategies. So that's kind of the high level work that or a high level description of the work that we're doing here. Of course, within that work, it's imperative that we incorporate stakeholder engagement, community input, and PBC member agency preferences. So we are working closely with staff at this point to try to get a solid understanding of the basin and the historical perspective here, and how that might feed into our analysis as well. Of course, it's important here to develop a legally sound, defensible, and basin-specific fee methodology. So this is not something that's one size fits all. It should be tailored to the needs of this basin. And because we don't have decades of precedent of how to fund these sorts of things, we have to dot our I's, cross our T's, and make sure that we're developing something that's legally sound as well. So we are working closely with legal counsel on that aspect of this. Really, the overall goal here, of course, is to provide the foundation for a fee program in support of GSP implementation in the basin. So although we're focused on funding, we're keeping that in mind, that that's kind of the overarching goal here. So you see a chart on this slide. This is all the team members that are involved. Myself there near the top, and then also from SCI, we are assisted by John Bliss, our president, and two of our VPs, Susan Barnes and Edric Kwan. You'll notice Dan Heimel on the left there, and on the right, under Nate Page, a few more GSI folks. We have Mitchell Farger and Nicole Palmer. They are helping out with database work and with GIS as well. So we really like this team. We feel like we have a well-rounded group of people that can really push this thing along where it needs to go. Just one more slide about the team here. I think one of the things that we appreciate in having people like Dan and Nate on the team is being able to incorporate experience within this basin specifically. So both in terms of understanding groundwater use, both now and in the past, but also understanding community perspective and member agency perspective. So we're really looking to leverage that personal experience in this basin, combine that with our knowledge and understanding of rate and fee establishment, and come up with something that is optimal for the basin. Next, I want to touch on the scope of work. So again, fairly high level here, but I wanted to just kind of check in on some of these tasks that we've begun working on. We have been working for the last few months, and we're continuing to do the work. You'll notice that equation there on this slide. I wanted to show that because a lot of these tasks really go towards filling in that equation, right? Depending on how costs are apportioned, a rate structure might include several components or options. There might be a couple different equations such as that. But when we're looking at revenue requirements at cost categories and extractor categories or user classes, what we're really trying to do is fill in that equation to inform the rate. So one of those first things I mentioned is revenue needs. Of course, that's the top part of that equation. So to fill in that numerator, what we need to do here is to identify a reasonable and efficient financial strategy that will inform that rate. And we're looking currently at doing that over a 5-year period. So incorporating all relevant costs going out 5 years into the future. The other part of that is identification of cost components. And what that really refers to is more of a categorization of costs as opposed to how much they are. And this comes into play for several reasons. One is that this helps us to identify the appropriate beneficiaries or extractors or properties that are receiving service or benefit from specific costs. But it also helps us then develop a methodology of cost allocation across different groundwater extractors. I'll note as well that some of our preliminary categories, which are kind of the larger buckets, so to speak, stem from the sections of the water code which provide GSAs the authority to charge fees. So that's sections 10730 and 10730.2. There are certain constraints listed in those code sections, and so we are being mindful of that. So we have program administration sort of as one of those buckets that would include SGMA required activities such as the annual report. It would also include general admin costs. And then the second bucket we have at this time is projects and management actions. So that's non-capital projects or management actions as well as capital projects. We likely will end up with some subcategories within each of those, but I think at the very least we'll have those categories. So in terms of the bottom part of that equation, we are looking at using evapotranspiration data. Of course, that's an extremely useful tool, one that not all basins have. So a lot of our analysis to this point has involved that information, that data. One of the things pertaining to that is this analysis of extractor categories I mentioned a few minutes ago. So with this, we're looking to analyze and develop groundwater extractor categories based on relevant factors, such as groundwater use patterns, the need for alternative water sources, and other factors as well. So what we look to do here is to develop a recommendation of a classification of extractor categories within the basin. The second thing I have here is database development. Of course, we need a solid foundational database here to support the fee program. That's already underway. We have identified all parcels that intersect the basin, and we've attached to those various property characteristics such as parcel numbers, tax rate areas, that sort of thing, but also groundwater use characteristics such as some preliminary ET data, crop type and acreage, and GSA jurisdiction as well. As I mentioned earlier, of course, wrapped up in all this work is stakeholder engagement. So this is a key focus for us also. We want to incorporate PBCC member GSA perspective. We're looking to identify common needs and goals here. There are always challenges that come with that, but we find that the solutions you can find to those issues generally produce a more optimal outcome in the end. So that's a focus for us. And again, we're in communication with GSA staff to make sure that we're identifying what those different perspectives and goals are. In a more broad sense, we want to incorporate community perspective. This again is, I think, where it's very helpful to have some folks on our team that have experience in the basin. So working with our team and with staff, we're trying to improve our understanding of the community. And there is also included in the scope a community meeting as well as preparation of messaging documents, that sort of thing. So once our approach is a bit more refined, we'll be engaging more directly in those activities. Of course, the overall goal here, again, is to establish a clear understanding of groundwater use and groundwater users within the basin, and to focus on mutually beneficial solutions to groundwater management, including funding. I wanted to touch briefly one more time on this idea of cost apportionment. This is something we're working on currently. So stemming from some initial analysis related to revenue requirements and cost categories and extractor categories, we're developing various methods of apportioning costs across groundwater users within the basin. So we're looking at various rate structures, different ways that you can go about apportioning costs. We're exploring things like having a base rate and a supplemental rate. We're exploring things that might be costs that might be allocated to specific categories, that sort of thing. So at this point, we don't have anything nailed down. We're continuing to work with staff to develop the most viable options here. I do want to note as well that in accordance with Propositions 26 and 218, cost apportionment must relate to the benefit or service provided to groundwater users. So that's informing that analysis as we go on. This slide just provides a brief summary of the two fee types prescribed by the Water Code by SGMA for use by GSAs. We have Water Code Section 10730 fees, which are generally understood to be regulatory fees in accordance with Prop 26. These are prescribed for funding program administration or operations. So again, this comes back to SGMA-related costs as well as general admin operations costs. The implementation procedure for this fee type is somewhat streamlined. These are imposed by board action or resolution. They do require a fee study or a cost of service study to sort of justify the rationale behind them, but a somewhat more streamlined implementation there. On the bottom, you see Water Code 10730.2 fees, which are generally thought to be property-related fees in accordance with Prop 218. These have far less constraints over what they can fund. The Water Code does list several things that relate to costs relevant to the PBCC here. These would include program administration and operations, but also projects and management actions as well. So much more well-rounded in terms of what the second type can fund. These do require a mailed notice to all affected property owners, as well as a protest hearing. The fees can only be implemented if a majority protest is not achieved. So there's a bit more of a hurdle there. But again, I think that's something that is common in the world of water management. And it's something that we're taking into consideration as we go down this path. One other thing I want to note here is that we are looking at different possibilities of using maybe one of each of these fees to fund specific cost categories, or the second type maybe to fund everything. Obviously, that first type can't fund everything; it's more constrained. But we haven't taken anything off the table at this point in terms of that approach. Just to touch on this one more time as well, we have these two sections of the Water Code, 10730, 10730.2. These authorize GSAs to charge fees. But regardless of what the Water Code says, we have to identify and comply with the appropriate constitutional pathway. And so depending on the fee type, that would be Prop 26 or Prop 218. And that's how we identify the appropriate implementation procedures and proportionality requirements. So again, we're working closely with legal counsel on this as we go through. And this, yeah, thank you. I was going to say, I keep clicking there. I apologize. This slide is really just to summarize some of the challenges that come with this kind of work and kind of our approach to dealing with them. In terms of technical challenges, there's a need obviously for supporting data and a sound financial strategy as well. So again, we're developing a rigorous database here, really looking to bring in as many attributes as we need. And that will of course be reactive to whatever we decide the optimal structure is as well. In terms of legal, I've already kind of touched on this, but again, we want to make sure we're fulfilling all the procedural and legal requirements related to whichever fee type or types are implemented. In terms of politics, we want something that's politically viable. We really want to try to earn some community acceptance here for whatever structure we choose. So that's where you all come in as well as staff, getting key feedback from boards and from staff and from the community here. And again, effective community outreach is a key part of that as well. In terms of timing, there's a little bit of a question mark here in terms of when this will be implemented, but we are working closely with staff on that, establishing key dates of deliverables and maintaining open communication to be sure that we get this thing done at the optimal time as well. Couple project milestones listed here. We do have within the scope the development of several cost recovery alternatives, or essentially different fee structures, as well as an alternative selection workshop. So once we refine these options a bit more, we'll have that workshop and get some key feedback on which of those more refined options is perhaps the way to go, or the optimal approach. As I mentioned, we're developing a database in support of the fee program. The foundation of that is there, but we'll continue to add to that as needed along the way. We also have a draft technical memorandum or fee study and corresponding presentation, and then coming back with a final technical memorandum and corresponding presentation as well. And lastly, that community workshop that I mentioned earlier. So these are, I think, are just some of the high-level milestones that we see coming in the months ahead. And you can click a few more times for me. Thank you. I had intended to take those off. Appreciate it. So this is a proposed tentative timeline. Again, we're going to be reactive here to the needs of this agency and member agencies. But we are into July now, and you'll notice 1, 2, 3, and 4, those first 4 scope tasks there. Those are well underway. We're currently working on those with staff. We've also begun number 5 there, the cost recovery alternatives, begun to look at some different options, and we're refining those based on some initial feedback. We tentatively see a community workshop happening sometime around October, and then coming with that draft tech memo or fee study and presentation, perhaps in November, getting some feedback, and then coming back again, with the final version in January. So these may shift a bit, but I will note that we do have a backstop here because this project is grant funded. We do need to finish by April 30th, 2025, and I apologize, it says 2024 there, but that is supposed to be 2025. So yeah, that's all I have. Appreciate your time, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Great, thank you very much. We'll first take public comment on this item 6B and then bring it back to the board for discussion. And I think the discussion afterwards will be just the 5 members of the board here. So if there's any representatives of agencies that want to comment, let's cover that during public comment. Public comment on this 6B, please. Mr. Graywall.
Yes, thank you. Greg Graywall. Okay. Blended water helps grapes. Blended water doesn't help the basin. You don't want cutbacks. Let's make that clear. OPM, other people's money. We're not here to pay for your projects. ET is applied water that's evaporating off the crop or the soil. It's not what's being pumped from the ground. So without you measuring what's being pumped from the ground, you're wasting more water because your ag ponds are not covered. 7 years of best management practice that have failed because you have not used for 7 years since the Nacimiento pipeline has been intact to put that water to beneficial use, 100% of it, in lieu of pumping. That could have been done. So instead of blending a blended water thing, you could have improved your treatment plant and use that water in your city like it was designated for originally. You did a blended water study in Paso Robles in 2000. And they could have built a treatment plant at the dam and the water would have been coming treatment. The city and ag made the shallow well problem, not the people and the county, by allowing those ag clusters to be around agriculture that used to be dry farmed in cattle and then turned into irrigated. And obviously, people are forgetting about AB 2453. Almost an 80% vote of the people that live over the basin that aren't going to pay for your mess. We've been down this road before. Most of them are de minimis users. Ag uses 67%, the cities and the CSDs use 30%, and the other people use 3%. Put that in your cost evaluation. And then we bring up the water code again. I already paid for state water. I've paid for over 22 years. I got zero benefit. That's a special tax. Why am I paying for state water? Sure the heck ain't gonna pay to water grapes. Anybody that thinks that is crazy. I've been in a court trial for 11 years. Won every trial, 5 trials, 2 stipulated agreements. That's coming to an end. You got over 800 properties that they're gonna get their quiet title. They're not gonna be part of your operation. We have the state constitutional right to the beneficial use of the water beneath our land, to use on our land, not to transfer, not to exchange, not to store, not to sell, not to make profit off of doing something with water. And if you had a carryover provision or a place to put the unused Nacimiento water, you'd have that water available when you need it. So I don't know why you talk about supplemental water when you've had it since 2015. $200 million for a 45-mile pipeline has 3,909 acre feet of capacity space that's been removed because of the faulty repairs that have been done. And it can't go past it San Luis right now. So since San Luis can't use their water, why isn't it being used?
Thank you, Mr. Graywall. Other public comment on item 6B, Ms. Myrie.
Hi, Ann Myrie, property owner in Shandon. I'm glad we have reached this point where we're talking about fee structures. I'm a little unclear about what we're talking about today, whether we're talking about just funding the GSA, which probably the county would like to unload their share. And I would suggest that everyone that resides or owns property within the boundaries of the Paso Robles groundwater basin benefits from a successful GSA. And so there might be a way to have a rather low what do I want to call it? Parcel tax of some sort, or something on the county tax bill that would fund just the management of the basin. When it comes to projects, I think users of the or beneficiaries are the ones that would pay for that. I'm a little, what really confused me is the mentioning of putting a charge on pumpage. I'm not sure what that means exactly and what that money was going to be used for. But I think if we're just talking about operating the basin, we should look at all the beneficiaries, which would be all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item 6B? Mr. Carter.
Yeah, Steve Carter, San Miguel. So I've been part of the process since, I guess we started the original thing back how many years. You know, I have been an irrigator here for 35, 36 years, a small vineyard in the red zone there near Tower Road. I work for a large company. I have another property. I've been a alfalfa grower, and I've also have deciduous trees now. So I've got a reasonable amount of experience. I certainly think I've been waiting for the fee structure for some time. You know, I think that it's part of the solution to our problem for users to have to pay. Everybody's going to be more careful if they're paying for something. As a landowner and a county resident, I'm not particularly impressed with paying fees that don't show some benefit. Right now, you know, we have the State Water Resources Control Board has forced Cigna upon us, but as a groundwater user, as an irrigator, you know, we also have the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board with Ag Order 4.0. They're collecting a serious amount of dollars from us as irrigators, especially those that are over the Paso Basin, that every year we have to, through a great example of state-sponsored extortion, you know, we have to join the Central Coast Preservation Inc. So we have to pay fees there. We have to have our wells monitored. We have to look for certain chemicals in that. And I think you can look at the studies and see that there's very little benefit to the amount of money that we're already paying. So I think that we should have a fee structure. I think that it has to be somewhat proportional to the use. Obviously, if we have to have something just to run the nuts and bolts of the Sigma process, as far as the 1 year, 5 year studies, we need something there. Any projects are going to be 218 based on those that benefit. But I see that as a potential being able to save some water usage, you know, to pay for, if it costs more, you know, we will see Mr. Graywall's covering of ag ponds and that kind of thing, obviously. The only other thing I would say is that we've been trying to determine, you know, what is the cost of pumping water out of the ground? It's not free. Certainly you have to look at the life of the well, the life and repairs operation of the pumps. And, you know, we're looking at some considerable amount already per acre foot to irrigate. But an additional fee, I think, would cause, you know, some more savings to the amount that's going used right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Mr. Powell.
Good. Murray Powell again. So I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm not exactly sure where we're at with this study. Is this a contract that's already been executed to hire these folks, or where are we at on this? Yes,
Yeah,
no?
we'll collect all the questions and get them answered on this item too, Mr. Powell.
Okay, well, assuming it is, I'd like to know when the RFP was issued, when the interviews were done with anybody who responded to that proposal, who executed the contracts, And this question goes back to who was the authorized contracting agent at the time that this consulting agreement, if one exists, was done. And if you look at your MOA section 3.3, you'll see that you're required to advise all of the GSAs of any negotiations that are going on. They should have the opportunity to be involved in interviewing and reviewing any of the situation going with any of these contracts. So I assume if this contract was executed, that it would have had to have gone through the city of Paso as a contracting agent before July 9th. So I would like to get that clarified. And also, I don't even understand what the rate study is really supposed to be accomplishing here. So, but I'm sure that'll come out in the future at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item 6B? Any online, Mr. Blakesley?
Yeah, we have one online, Patricia Wilmore.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Patricia Wilmore. I am with the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance. I have two questions. One is that under a Prop 26 fee, this must be imposed by board action or resolution. So my question is, does the PBCC have the governing authority to do that? Or what is the board that would have the governing authority to do that? And secondly, a down the road question, I suppose, and that is that if we have a basic rate and an irrigator decides to pay for, if that is the system, blended water, would that possibly affect their basic rate? Would it be an add-on to the basic rate? And I'm sure that might come forward somewhere down the line, but it is a question that comes to my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
No.
Okay, then we'll close public comment on this item, bring it back to the committee. Perhaps we could start by answering a couple of questions, Mr. Blakely or Mr. Reilly, about the contract with WSC. Whether it went
With WSC or SCI?
I'm sorry, SCI.
So yeah, the contract with SCI is with the County of San Luis Obispo. This was an item that is grant funded, and we've discussed this before, but the grant funded projects are not cost shared by the other GSAs. So the county is the contracting entity. The MOA language that was brought up has to do with contracts that are going to be cost shared by all the GSAs. So this is not one of those. With regard to the dates, we'll have to get back with you on the dates that it was advertised and interviews, and I don't think we need to get in that right now.
We do report in the memo that the RFP was issued.
Okay. Issued January 12th.
Yeah. Okay.
And
staff from all the GSAs had an opportunity to participate in that process.
Yeah, GSA staff were all involved in review of the proposals that were received, and in making recommendations for selection.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Gibson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this. This is a substantial undertaking, and I look on the list of the team here and see a lot of great experts. I've had the pleasure of working with Mr. Heimel in other water basins. What didn't immediately pop out to me is legal support, and my question is really one of, yeah, it probably should put me on a timer. My various colleagues have suggested that over the years. The real interesting and challenging part of this is the question of discerning regulatory fees from property-related fees of establishing essentially nexus and proportionality for benefit there. And so, two-part question. One, is there an emerging, do we have a body of legal opinion that's emerged as Sigma has developed here that gives us some guidance as to how that happens? And the second part of that is, do we then have access, or how do we then run this by the necessary legal experts to confirm that these are viable alternatives as we set up that conversation?
Thank you. That's a great question. And as I mentioned earlier, we unfortunately don't have, decades of precedent the way a traditional, water agency does. And I'm not an attorney, so please take what I say with a grain of salt, but I do have the pleasure of working with a lot of leading water resources attorneys. While there is not quite as solid of a foundation of general perspective, I think there is something there that has emerged in recent years. So we are working with Elizabeth is Stoll Reeves, who is, I guess she's like project counsel for this project specifically, as well as Erica Stuckey, county counsel. And we have kind of shared some preliminary information with all the member GSA's legal counsel as well. And so we'll at least have those resources, those minds come together and determine the best approach.
Okay, that's great. And that sort of leads to a second question, which is connected with the one Ms. Wilmore raised in terms of governance. And I do know that GSA staffs have been discussing governance, and I wonder at an appropriate point whether some report on where we are with that process and how it informs the conclusions that might come and the implementation that would come after this rate study is completed.
Yes, the rate study really has precipitated the need to talk about governance within the basin. Those conversations are underway at the staff level. At some point in the very near future, we will be bringing to this body a status report of those conversations, and also probably a request for action on the part of this body on direction to move forward with decisions about governance for the basin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other, Mr. Merrill?
Somewhat related to that.
Can you turn your microphone?
Somewhat related to that. I think I've mentioned this before. You've got a considerable amount of funding for ongoing operations coming from the county GSA, and the county GSA is getting their money from their general fund essentially. And meanwhile, you have other entities that are part of this committee where their members are specifically being assessed to fund this budget. I don't think that can go on that way forever. I think the county, I pay property taxes of the county, so my property taxes are going to pay for the county being here, and then I'm also paying through my water district. I'm not the only one here to say, it could even be argued for the cities paying to be here from their budget. It's an added cost, but there isn't any assessment. I would think that if you're going to get into funding, the low-hanging fruit is paying ongoing operating expenses that are clearly not capital. They're not paying for water. Those are ongoing expenses that seem to me would qualify very easily to be covered by either a dollar per acre range, or I prefer some kind of assessment based on how much water you pump. And I don't think we're talking about a huge burdensome amount of money to run the basic operations here. I mean, all of us, we don't get, you're not paying us for anything, and we have the luxury of the city providing us this great meeting place. And so therefore that's something I think ought to at least be mentioned in this rate study. Could there be some money to pay for our ongoing expenses? And I think if there is some room to have it volumetrically based, not in a punitive way, but something that just psychologically, when somebody's running their pumping water, they will think about it if there's a meter. Like you go to the gas station, if you didn't see any numbers changing on that, how much gas you put in the car or what kind of car you have. I mean, it would be much different than when you look there and you see that thing going around, around, around. Eventually it's more than the credit card can take, right? You got to put another card in to keep buying it. So that's one thing. I think it's important to separate ongoing operations from capital. And I think that if you keep it all balled up together, the debate over who benefits from it, it just swamps the ship, and we don't get anything done on it. So I would hope there could be some way to kind of separate those things so we could cover that. The other thing I think is it's not related to this directly, but I'm anxious to see where are we with the Miller program. I mean, there was going to be a separate presentation. There's got to be one upcoming pretty soon, but it's another story that right now, the more we could get people not to irrigate who don't want to irrigate. There may be people irrigating because they want to preserve their water rights. You can go 5 years right now under county regulations, and it sounds like a long time, except I've learned the older I get, the faster 5 years go by. So we don't want to be forcing people to irrigate land just because they're going to lose their water rights. Let's see if we can get through that. Another corollary we got to think about is there are implications for the Williamson Act. Most of the Williamson Act acres, especially those with vineyards, most of those require irrigation. We may need some help in modifying the rules of ag preserves to allow to cope for idling land for drought purposes, or for some kind of a temporary stay where you don't have to pay money to get out of the ag preserve. You want to stay in it, you just don't want to irrigate. And that would be something to study. What would have to be done to take that into account? In 1965, when the ag preserve law hit the books, I don't think a lot of folks were thinking about the fact we'd be sitting in a drought and we're not going to be able to irrigate land, not like now. So that is something we ought to be working on. But all this time's going by, we don't want to hear, that's a great idea. Oh, by the way, we can't get around the Williamson Act. There's a lot of land in the Williamson Act in this county, and it's an important tool for preserving ag. Well, how can we hang on to the Williamson Act but still cope with shortages? So those are a couple of things that are maybe not, you don't think of right away, but I think we should be thinking about them and not let another year go by and we don't have answers to some of these questions.
Thank you. Both great points. And Blaine and I have discussed the Miller program and demand reduction and how that might relate to this process. And we'll be having plenty more of those conversations. So I appreciate you adding a couple points regarding that. And I would agree that the importance of separating cost categories out, looking at a general admin cost versus projects, regardless of what path we take, is important. So that's something that we're taking seriously, and we're working on that now.
Any other, Mr. Baker?
Just want to comment on Mr. Merrill's comments regarding the dumping of water to reserve water rights. I agree 100%. It's insanity that people have to do that. It makes no sense. But in terms of where this is going in terms of domestic wells, is this going to be are you planning to target domestic wells? And I guess the only way you're going to know what people are using is to meter their wells. Is that something that's down the pipe on this?
Well, I would say that there is no plan to do that, and I believe that the SGMA actually prohibits the metering of de minimis wells. So I don't even think that the authority is there for those types of users. I will say that at this point, we are taking into consideration the relatively small, minimal, if any, benefit received by those users. But we have not come to a conclusion about the overall rate structure and what that looks like.
Okay, but they are potentially targeted as participating.
I think at this point, there's been conversations about them not being targeted or included. But if they must be included in some way, we might be able to get creative with how we do that. We might be able to work with the member GSAs in terms of covering those costs. So we're having preliminary conversations about that now with staff and with legal. Unfortunately, at this time, I don't have a solution there, but we understand that that's an issue we need a solution to.
I think the guidance from all the GSAs was, let's do everything we can to not assess, small pumpers and de minimis users, and that, the fees that we want to use to fund this Sigma effort should be paid for by the larger extractors. And that's the goal of the program. There are some complexities of California law that, the people, we got to make sure that wherever there's benefit received, there's this proportionality, but that's certainly the goal.
Sure. And then a quick question on 218. So if you were to use a 218 to assess a fee, I have some limited knowledge of it. So like in our district, only our GSA, only people that are hooked up to the water and pay the bill like vote per se, not every resident. So would this be by a parcel? Would it be like it could be by acres? How would that work?
Yeah, so the way Prop 218 works is a little different for services like water related services, refuse, and there's one other exception. Where it's not a balloting, it's a mailed notice to affected property owners. And it's kind of one opportunity to protest per affected parcel. And so it doesn't require a yes vote, it requires a lack of protest. So a slightly different dynamic there. And the universe of people that would have that opportunity is affected parcels, is the Prop 218 language. So any parcel who would potentially be charged.
Parcel would be defined as, you could have a 2,000 acre vineyard and 5 acre vineyard. Are they equal? Or if they're
Yes, they are. It's not proportional. There's another funding mechanism called a benefit assessment, which is different, and that is relative to how much a parcel would be charged. But with a property related fee, it's a 1-to-1 per parcel. I will say that we're also looking at the potential to have some analysis related to like farming units, that sort of thing. But per Prop 218 rules, that process would be based on assessor's parcel lines.
Thank you.
Any other comments, discussion from the committee? Okay, thank you very much, Ryan.
Of course, thank you for your time.
Moving on to item 6C, Mr. Blakesley. Can you introduce this, please?
Yes, thank you, and I'll take this item. So this is an update on the grant spending plan and schedule. Again, just wanted to report that 7 invoices have been submitted to date. So the 7th invoice, which covers the period January through March of 2024, has been submitted to DWR. We talked already about the new DWR grant admin person, and so that new relationship is going well, and we appreciate their work, and DWR staff has been doing a great job. Again, the submitted invoice number 7 has been done, and staff is working on compiling invoice number 8, and we'll be submitting that shortly. And then the grant implementation planning schedule and budget is provided on the following slides. We'd just note on this slide that, again, to date, roughly 3.8 have been invoiced to date, and roughly 6.2 million of the $7.6 million grant are encumbered, and contracting will be done shortly on the budgeted items for that. Again, in your packet is the budget for the grant spending plan, and that's shown on the slide here. Just a quick note that the red text indicates costs that are contracted or will be nearly contracted, and so those dollar amounts are considered encumbered. And then moving over to the schedule, this is the current updated schedule for all the various grant projects that are implemented or being implemented, and this reflects the most current timeline for those schedules. And that's all I have to report.
Great, thank you. Let's open it up for public comment on this item 6C. Mr. Graywall.
Thank you, Greg Grewell. First question, talking about cost shared on this budget. Is Mr. Reilly and Mr. Blakely, are there times since they're working for the cooperative group, part of the shared cost? Because if they're doing specific things for the county, that's one thing. If they're doing something for the cooperative committee, seems to me they should be paying back some of the time to the county taxpayers that are paying for them. Second, If you sign up to go to private school and you have it in your budget that that's okay, you still have to pay for public school. You want to join a voluntary water district that doesn't deliver water and then snivel about the payment, that's your problem. If you want to join the Farm Bureau, it costs money too. Even though they lost 700 to 800 people during AB 2453. Cattlemen's Association didn't lose anybody. In fact, we got more people. And we control most of the acreage in and around all these properties that take care of the watershed and don't use water. So I find it interesting also on the grant spending, regardless of what anybody says, we have things we could do that benefit today that would have benefited yesterday and would have benefited the day before that and the year before that, and we haven't done them. We're working on projects with OPM, other people's money, and we've been doing that since day one with the matching fund application that was supposed to be monies that were spent on the basin when there was never money spent on the basin, and they still gave you the $1.5 million. It'd be nice to see some stuff on our grant spending that actually benefits the basin. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item 6C? Mr. Powell.
So, Murray Powell. So I'm a retired CPA, been out of the business forever, but was there for 20 years. So I'm a little confused over this item and all of the different budgets that are posted in the agenda. So if you look at the next, actually if you go up a page, I believe page 45, you'll see a spending plan, which to me is a budget of the $7.6 million grant with no dates, no indication of what's been spent to date on this particular document, what's going to be spent in the future, and also on this on one of those pages that you guys just had up there, it showed 7 invoices, I guess, to the state. And I know Mr. Really, I think it was last meeting or maybe 2 ago, had indicated like 5 or 6 maybe invoices. And he also made the comment that much of that money had not yet been reimbursed from the state. So I'm just wondering where we're at today in terms of grant spending. Who's actually funding this money in the interim until the state reimburses us, somebody, and where are we at on the status between what's been invoiced and what has not been paid yet? Also, if you go down to page 48, I'm sorry, this item actually references 2 attachments on page 78 and 79. And earlier, I had commented on the problem that the board supervisor has, and Mr. Gibson has on coming up with their own budgets. So, you know, on page 78 and 79, you'll see on 78, an actual budget that apparently was approved by the GSAs some months ago. And then on 79, you will see the budget that has been revised by the Board of Supervisors, according to this, that was approved in their recent July board meeting. So I'm a little confused over whether there is a budget. You know, there's numbers flying all around here, and I don't believe anybody really knows what the budget is. And your MOA requires a fiscal year approved budget before you
Thank
can
you, Mr. Powell.
spend any money
A-
or make any obligations
Any-
for any future liabilities.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any other public comment on this item 6C? Any online comment?
No.
We'll close public comment on this item and bring it back to the committee. Perhaps you could clarify, Mr. Reilly or Mr. Blakesley, quickly on one of those prior slides, the total amount that's been invoiced versus what's been reimbursed today. Yeah, thank you.
Let's see, we have another slide here in a minute that has, I think it will be better to answer that question.
Okay, so we'll address that in the next item. So any committee member comments or discussion or questions on this item? No, okay. Thank you, Mr. Blakesley. We'll move on to item 8. Mr. Reilly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'll actually be taking this item, and this is on May 22nd at our last PBCC meeting. The PBCC members directed staff to prepare an ongoing report on the quarterly expenses for the PBCC. And so staff put together GSA staff put together a quarterly expense report, and that's provided in your packet. This is something, again, that for expenses that have been incurred for each quarter, and they're listed on the following slide. I'll go to that. They are separated by grant and non-grant funded projects. So I will just zoom in just a little bit for orientation. Again, at the top, these are the grant funded expense. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, we're going to go through this. The grant funded expenditures are not cost shared by the GSAs. They are funded by the county, and we submit reimbursement requests to the state for reimbursement of those. So those items up on top that Taylor's going to go through are not cost share. There's no cost incurred by any of the GSAs. There is another bottom line that Taylor will go through, and those are the costs that have been shared under the terms of the MOA among the GSAs.
Thanks for the clarification, Blaine. Again, on this grant funded expense chart, you can see it's done. It's the staff shown it by starting in 2022, which is when the grant was first awarded, and it's set up by quarter. So again, you can see on the top here, it goes through 2025 Q2, which is the end of the grant reimbursable period. The way this is set up, again, now looking at the categories, this is shown by components 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And again, that's all the components in the grant spending plan that was signed by the county and DWR. The subcategories under this, you can see that there's planning, design, construction, monitoring, outreach. Those are categories that DWR requires when we submit the invoices to DWR. So again, this is following the format that DWR requires for the reimbursement. So every quarter we submit an invoice similar to this, but a little different look, but the similar construction. And that's why staff's left this quarterly report and left those categories in there to match the invoices that are submitted to DWR. So scrolling down to the bottom, is sticking on the grant funded costs. You have invoice to date and then remaining funds. Again, this expense report is through Q1 of 2024. You may recall in an earlier item, I reported that we've submitted invoice number 7, which is Q1 of 2024. So these costs invoice to date is 3.8 million. And you may recall in the previous slide, I corrected the figure where it said 3.5 million were invoiced, and I corrected that verbally to say 3.8, which matches this number here. So these are all the dollars that have been invoiced to DWR, and you can see the remaining funds are at $3.79 million. Going down to the non-grant funded costs, again, currently the only cost shared items, as Blaine mentioned, is the annual report. You can see the entities in the basin, the different GSAs, and you can see how those costs were shared. In 2023, which was for annual report water year 2022. Again, the EPC was not a member of the PBCC at that time, so that's why that was cost shared with the existing four GSAs. And then you can see then those cost share was split amongst all five GSAs when the EPC joined the PBCC. And those costs in 2024 were for the water year 2023 annual report. I understand there are some costs that occurred for the water year 2021 annual report, which would have been invoiced in 2022. Those invoices GSA staff is still procuring from the city who is managing that. And so we'll update this for the meeting in September to include that. And that's all we have to report.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Blakesley. Let's open this up for public comment on this item 8. No, not seeing any public comment in the room. Is any online, Mr. Blakesley?
None online, Chair.
Okay, then we'll close this public comment. Any discussion or comments from the committee members?
Just receive a file, sounds
Okay.
like. Yeah.
Mr. Baker.
So I don't know, this is, so we got in our packet the budget, the way I recall approving at the RGSA, but then we have this revised budget, which is approximately $200,000 less.
This is going to be a next item.
Oh, okay, sorry. Hold my comment.
I said item 8, but I meant item 7. Okay, well then we'll move on to item 8. And is that Mr. Reilly, or you?
This one I'll take.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you, Chair. This is just an update on memorandum, the MOA amendment number 2. And then also an update on the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget. So MOA number 2, amendment number 2, that MOA amendment number 2 has gone to each of the GSAs. And it was approved by each of the GSAs. The county was the last GSA to approve it. That was approved on July 9th by the Board of Supervisors at their meeting. And basically what MOA amendment number 2 is to allow, in addition to the city of Paso Robles, to be a contracting agent on behalf of the GSAs for work that is cost shared among the GSAs. It also now allows the county to act as a contracting agent. So that's the update on memorandum of MOA amendment number 2. The next update is the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget. This budget was recommended for approval by the PBCC. Was that the March meeting?
March 27th.
At the March 27th, 2024 meeting. Each of the GSAs then brought the budget, the recommended budget, back to their GSAs for consideration and for approval. That occurred. Each of the GSAs did approve the recommended budget on June 18th. We brought the recommended budget to the Board of Supervisors, County Board of Supervisors to consider. And they requested that a amended budget be brought back that would only include funding, our proportional share of the funding for the 5-year groundwater sustainability plan periodic evaluation, and for this fiscal year's annual report costs, or water year annual report costs. On July 9th, the Board of Supervisors approved the amended budget. So what that means is that the budget that has been approved by, the portion of the budget that has been approved by all GSAs include costs for the annual report, the 5-year, or not, yeah, for the annual report and the 5-year GSP evaluation. The county did not approve those other highlighted costs. So effectively, this becomes the the budget that can be used for the purposes of expenditures for this next fiscal year. Take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reilly. With that, we'll open it up for public comment on this item 8. Mr. Powell.
Not sure what Mr. Reilly said. I couldn't hear him very well. As you said, oh, good, that's great. So those 3 highlighted items are on that budget on the left is, I believe, the approved budget that was approved by all 5 GSAs, I assume. And that was back a ways, at least several months or a couple, 3 months. So as you can see, when you go to the right, you can, Tyler, a little bit, or you can, those 3 items have disappeared for some reason. And these are all kind of high priority items, in my opinion. We've been talking about outreach programs now for a year and a half. And the monitoring program is another year and a half conversation. And I'm not sure, what's the 50 governance? Okay, yeah, whatever. So anyway, as I indicated a couple minutes ago when I was up here, so the Board of Supervisors have, for themselves, I guess, have approved unapproved budget. And it's interesting because the heading on that unapproved budget indicates that this is a PBC recommended budget. Oh, with the boss revision. So what are you guys gonna do here? Are you gonna go back to each of your GSAs and approve a new budget? And also going back to the prior item, on that first item that had all that list with all the red different numbers, I assume there's gonna be, and I know it's grant money, but I assume some of that grant money is also going to be spent this year. These budgets are supposed to account for everything. You've got a section at the top for grant funded money and a section at the bottom for actually GSA funded costs. And so where's the information here? So, you know, as I mentioned before, Mr. Gibson's a treasurer. And you would think as a treasurer that he'd be on top of this stuff, but he apparently doesn't care. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Mr. Graywall?
Yes, thank you. Greg Graywall. My concern is number 14, the ongoing basin monitoring operations and maintenance for GSP initiatives. Why isn't that part of the expanded monitoring network that we have $1,400,000 for? Why was that erased if it most likely is going to be paid through the grant funding and not through the other costs on the budget? Same with the outreach programs. We've been waiting for the outreach program last fair time. A year from now, we were ready to go and nothing's happened. Nothing's happened. We haven't had a meeting from our technical advisory committee. We identified all the places and stuff. You know, you asked us to put in the time, we put in the time, we did the work, we gave you all the stuff, and then we just sat around for a year. The 50,000 for the JPA, that's between you guys. You wanna have another thing, is because you don't have any authority. This is the whole problem. You guys make a decision, you're supposed to take that decision back to your own GSAs, let them decide, and then bring it back and say, okay, everybody decide, or send an email or something. The public doesn't get in on it. How's the public supposed to know? Unless they go to every single GSA meeting. There's gotta be some, I look at the minutes and stuff. I go to the San Miguel meetings. I only come to a few of the Paso meetings. I go to all the board meetings. They didn't have any individual GSA group meetings that that decided some of this stuff. So it's more about the transparency and what's going on than it's about, to me, anything else. There was no doubt in my mind that Mr. Reilly shouldn't be a part of the amendment to spend money. That wasn't the point. The point was the way it was done. It wasn't done correctly. Should have been done before he started doing whatever, and that would have been proper. Nobody had a problem except San Miguel with who was going to be added to the agencies that were going to be able to spend money. And that's what drug it out for a few months in the beginning. So it's just a matter of doing it the right way, and everybody can see what's going on and be transparent about what we're doing. And then I don't think you'd have as much heartache in this whole thing with people having to be questioning what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item 8? Any online?
None online.
With that, we'll close public comment, bring it back to the committee for questions, comments, discussion.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, let me suggest a path forward. Let me first apologize to my colleagues here on the PBCC for this confusion in this particular action by the Board of Supervisors on July 9th. The budget was delayed and reintroduced on, it was delayed from June 18th, I believe, and reintroduced on July 9th at the insistence of Supervisor Arnold, who then in the end voted against it. And there was considerable confusion in the particular item that was before the board that because there was one item that required a 4/5 vote, and that was basically internal budget adjustment for the county. But the failure of the board to pass the budget that the PBCC, to approve the budget that the PBCC approved, has caused some confusion about what the PBCC can do in moving its agenda forward. And I can confirm with Mr. Reilly that actually internal to the county budget, we are funded to take care of these 3 items that were deleted. Is that correct? our share of it.
That's correct. We have in my department's budget, our share of those costs.
So what I think we need to do, and what I would be happy to do is work with Mr. Reilly to get the PBCC budget back on the board's agenda in the form that it was approved by the PBCC. If I could take with me the consensus of my colleagues here that you would like me to do that, that will be an added help. And if the board can approve what the PBCC approved, that removes the uncertainties that are extant here. I'm fairly confident we can get the budget. I hesitate to predict what 5 supervisors on a given Tuesday would be doing. But given the unacceptable confusion that the action of the board created, it would be helpful for me to have your how should we say, indication that you'd like us to clear this up, and I think we can.
I certainly think that would be helpful. I mean, the recommended budget's been approved by the other 4 GSAs. It would be great if it was.
And we have
money.
we have money in our,
So they would be very clear. There's one budget that we're operating off of for this fiscal year, 24-25. I would certainly think that'd be great.
Yeah, I would agree, Chair, that again, what was approved sounds like it's been stopped until the following this fiscal year, where you can see budget was pushed over to the right.
And we've got to continue developing a governance. We need to continue outreach and so forth.
Especially the monitoring operations, which is really, data we're looking for.
I'm happy to do that. I hope we could get it on the agenda of August 13th for the board. At the latest, it should be August 20th.
Yeah, let's take care of that.
Okay. Supervisor Gibson, we heard from, just for records, I heard from Committee Member Hammond and at turn time. Do you want a record from the?
If my colleagues are inclined to endorse this path, that's great. I'm going to pursue it nonetheless in order to make this straight.
Correct.
Yeah, well, our GSA approved, I guess the original budget, but what was the logic of the supervisors to eliminate those 3 items?
I hesitate to speak to that. I could not discern the logic myself.
And just one more question in terms of the monitoring. Do we know how many people we have signed up so far to participate in that?
In the expanded monitoring network?
Yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit of background. So the TAC, and it's been discussed here today, TAC made a recommendation to expand the network from about 23 wells to about 150 wells. And they identified those wells with backups for each of those wells. So there's kind of an A, B, and C list. We sent out outreach materials about a month ago with letters requesting that those owners of those wells reach out to us so we could go meet with them. And then we have a consultant on board that is actually going out and meeting with those individuals. I don't know the exact number to date how many have been signed up. I just talked to him earlier today. They've been out in the field for the last week, knocking on doors, talking to people. I certainly will be able to bring a report back to you at our next meeting to give you a full update on how many people we've got under contract or under an agreement.
And have we installed any monitoring equipment to date?
Not at the moment. We need to get the access agreements in place first so that we can do that. But that's a high priority from all GSAs. We've been, excuse me.
Websites.
Yeah. So yeah, as far as getting instrumentation in a subset of those wells, that's a high priority that is being worked on. But to date, I don't think we don't have any instruments installed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr.
Yeah. Question, Blaine. I mean, per Mr. Gibson, you are funded to continue the project, subject, to this paperwork that we're seeing. That wasn't really on paper that you are funded, but you are moving forward with the project as far as the different monitoring.
Absolutely, yes. That work is grant funded. That's moving forward, as we speak. We have consultants in the field probably at the moment. Yeah, that's underway.
Okay, thank
And I agree with Mr. Baker. It'd be great. Let's agendize an update on that for our September meeting.
Absolutely.
Any other comments or discussion of this item 8? Okay. Then we'll move on. We've already heard public comment on this item. So
the borders
on Mr. Powell, please.
Murray,
Sit down.
would you like to go to the next item?
Yes, let's move on to item 9, please.
Item 9. Or I should say item 9. This is the real item.
Meeting minutes.
Okay, so the May 22nd regular meeting minutes are in your packet, and their recommended motion is to approve the minutes unless there's any questions.
Okay, any public comment on this item 9, the minutes from our last meeting? Any online, Mr. Blakesley?
No.
Okay.
I'll move approval.
Hammond seconds.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? Okay. Roll call vote, please, Mr. Blakesley.
We actually don't need.
Oh, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Minutes are approved. Item 10, the opportunity for any committee member to make a comment. Mr. Merrill, any comments or nope? Mr. Baker? None from Shandon.
I don't think Paso had our water engineer, David Athy, had to leave, but we're good.
And I'll just say the county GSA has started outreach to the individual members of the county GSA, the individual property owners. Thanks to Mr. Reilly's hard work, along with our graphic artist and a few other folks, we got a very nicely designed brochure into the snail mail, into the hands of every parcel owner of the GSA. you know, with a link that might even bring us into the 21st century, inviting them to sign up for email and go to the internet and do all these magical things that apparently the modern world can do. I'm excited about that. We've gotten some good feedback on that. We've gotten 150 folks signed up or so on our email outreach list and or more.
Yeah, I checked, as of today, we've got about 300 now, so they're coming in, yeah.
Fantastic. And so this is going to make this is the first time since we created ourselves as a GSA that we've done direct outreach to the membership of it. I think that's going to be really important as we work through these many important decisions that we've got in front
Communication
of
is
us.
huge in this
Yeah,
kind of thing.
exactly. So I'm hopeful we get another blast out, hopefully in a more modern way. But if we got to stay with the snail mail, so be it. We'll do it. Anyway, I'm excited.
Great, thank you. Upcoming meetings, Mr. Blakesley, item 11.
Just to report, the next regular PBCC meeting is on September 25th at the same location here.
Great, thank you. Future items, number 12. Any future items that committee members want to see agendized? We've already mentioned an update on the progress of the expanded monitoring network.
Nope, just that one, that's fine.
Okay. Any correspondence received by the committee, Mr. Blakesley?
None.
Okay, well, with that, we'll adjourn this meeting at 6:11. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm in trouble.